Welcome to Samaritans Well today, the Soul Sense podcast. We have a special guest. Her name is Melissa Griffing, and she has her own counseling practice here in Dallas. It's called WellNest Counseling, and she is an LPC. We all know what that is, licensed professional counselor in Texas. Tell us a little about your counseling practice, Melissa.
I am a registered play therapist. And
Thank
so what
you.
that means is it just gives it's a designation that says I have done extra training on top of the regular LPC license that gives me that specialization to work with kids. We're in Dallas, kind of at Dallas and Farmers Branch. We're called WellNest Counseling because we believe we want to bring, wellness to your nest, whatever your nest looks like. We do specialize in working with kids. So we have play therapists, we have adolescent therapists. And then the other piece that we find really important is that if we're working with kids, we don't believe we're just working with kids. We believe we're working with the family and as a system. And so we like to work with parents too. And that means we're helping give little tidbits in parent coaching and how you can, how we can all work together to meet your needs. Because we see your kids 45 minutes a week, but you see them forever,
Yes.
all throughout the week. So it's really a partnership is how we believe it and how we function at WellNest.
I love that, Melissa. I really believe in bringing that family system together. Anything else about the practice that you want to tell us about before we kind of get into our topic?
I think I'd say, just our specialties are play therapy, adolescent therapy, parent coaching. We love working with those transitioning adults, right? Kind of those new adults. And we also love working with transitioning families. So whether you're going to be a new family because you're having a baby and you're entering into the world of parenting, or your family's changing in some way, we like to work with those transitions as well.
That's excellent. So today our topic with Melissa is working with children after a divorce or through a divorce. Tell us a little bit about how you'd like to just jump into that topic, because I know that's a very vital thing that you do.
Yeah, I would say, working with kids who are going through a divorce. I do have to preface, if it is a high conflict divorce, there are therapists that specialize in a high conflict divorce.
Okay, sure.
Right. And we are unfortunately not that. These therapists are therapists that are like going to court with the families and things like that. What we do when we're working with kids who've gone through a divorce is we're really looking at it from the kid's perspective, and we're trying to figure out, what is their viewpoint on what's going on? Are the behaviors we're seeing linked to the environment and the changing environment and what's going on? And then we're trying to figure out how can we help? Where is it, or where are we going to be of the best service to the family, whether that's figuring out how to co-parent or just give the child the space to process. It's divorce and kids going through a divorce is truly such a wide range, a wide spectrum of what that can look like.
I was thinking that you're going to get some children that are really raw, some that are probably just real self-protective and closed up. What could you tell us about kind of that wide range of children that you see?
Yeah, I think like you said, I think some kids are going to be more highly feeling. And those kids, we're going to see more emotion come from them. And then other kids are going to be more kind of closed off and within. And then we're not going to get a lot of feedback from them from that process. So and I think a lot of that kind of comes from your genetic makeup and kind of just how you are as a kid. And then I also think it comes from how do the parents cope with hard things and hard emotions? What are they being modeled?
Right. And so that's part of what you're trying to find out with the system, right? If the parent that brings the child in seems to be really stoic and reserved, that's going to tell you something maybe about where they're coming from. And how do you approach it? Let's just say you have a child that comes in that is on that raw side. How do you approach that? If they're just, they can hardly talk about it without crying, or they're sad or whatever, do you approach that somewhat differently than you do with maybe the other extreme?
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to the kiddo. And so that's our first step, is kind of figuring out the kiddo and how
Mm-hmm.
they handle emotions. So if
Yeah.
we have a kiddo that's more on the feeling side of things and more expressive
Mm-hmm.
with their emotions and ready to express to people, then honestly, sometimes that kind of makes it easier on our end, because we don't have to
Right.
like pull it out, you know? Um, and so in that case, we really just give space for the kiddo to express, and to express their emotion in a safe space where there's not going to be any judgment. There's a lot of big emotions that come with a child going through divorce. And they can range from anger to sadness to grief to anxiety. And so it's really just about giving those more highly feeling kids that space to process all of those things and to help them name it correctly, kind of going through those stages of grief almost.
Going through the stages of grief. I wonder, Melissa, of course, I work pretty much exclusively with adults, but one of the things I noticed with adults, and I wonder if it's similar with kids, the adults that are really crying and sad, sometimes it's hard for them to access anger. The ones that come in really mad, a lot of times it's harder for them to access the sadness. Have you seen that with children?
So I think the ones that have trouble accessing anger because they're feeling so much sadness, there's usually some sort of kind of grief or not grief, I'm sorry, a shame associated with
Okay.
feelings of anger. Um,
Okay, sure.
yeah, they're not allowed to be angry, or they've gotten in trouble for being angry. And that is, I don't, you can probably speak to this on the parenting or the marital side of things. I would assume that comes from like a generational trauma kind of being
Mhm.
passed down.
Yeah, it's really common, right? It's like,
Mm,
sometimes it's like the children don't get to get mad, even though maybe mom or dad does, or sometimes we just don't get mad in this family, or it could be the
mhm.
other side too. We don't cry about things. So
Right.
yes, a lot of times we do see it really generational. That's the way I grew up, and that's the way I'm raising my family. And obviously, if the parents are getting a divorce, there's been some kind of conflict here. Um,
Mhm.
Let me ask you this. One of the things that I work with adults a lot is mom and dad were fighting every night, and I was in my bedroom really scared. Is
Mhm.
that a
Mhm.
very common kind of thing where you're going to be processing that, or does that take just time for the layers to come out and get down to that kind of fear or trauma?
Yeah, and so I think one of the things parents have to remember is that we I think more commonly what happens in
Yeah.
this situation is that parents bring their kids to us and they're like, "Okay, ready, go fix." Right? Like
Yes.
let's
Here
do
they
it. Let's
are.
just
We're going to
here they
pass them
are.
over to you. Please fix them.
Fix, yes. Help them process, right? Or something I get very commonly is the misunderstanding of how kids do process, which totally makes sense because when we grow as an adult, we process very um, cognitively, verbally, abstractly.
Right.
We can do all that. Kids can't quite do that yet, especially young kids, fours, fives, six, sevens. They are
Yes.
not concrete verbal processors, which is why we use play in order to process these big, heavy things. So, something that I get commonly is a parent will bring their child in and they're like, well, y'all aren't talking about the divorce.
Oh,
And
right.
as right, and as play therapists, we don't lead the session. We have a child come in and we believe they're going to bring into the session what they need to process.
Like
And
what
kids,
they're carrying, they're going to bring in with them.
they're going to bring it in, right? They're
Yes.
bringing it in with them. So for example, to kind of take it out of divorce, put it in simple terms, what I'll see a lot for kids in the playroom is they'll come in and they'll take the dolls and they'll play out a conflict between friends, and
Okay.
and they'll kind of say, or they'll say like, you be this doll. This one's gonna not allow this doll to play with us. And so
Uh-huh.
we'll play that out. And what they're doing is they're playing out their experiences from school or daycare or home or something like
Mhm.
that. And they're integrating it into their understanding of the world and how that works. And so we can see that through divorce too. They'll play out, well, the daddy doll moved out and
Oh,
the
yeah.
baby doll was really sad. And so that's how we see that process. And that's how we help them cope and give them that space to just kind of figure it out through play.
So the play ends up being like a story that they're expressing from their hearts, whereas an
Mm-hmm.
adult might be able to communicate that with a lot richer vocabulary and life experience. The
Mm-hmm.
child plays it out and acts it out in
Mm-hmm.
front of you.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, right? Other times
Okay,
it's
sometimes, yeah.
sometimes. Other times it's a little bit more covert. Other times
Okay,
kids will play out something that has nothing to do with relationship or family or anything like that, but the themes are there. There's themes of conflict. There's
okay,
themes of arguing. There's themes of separating or staying too connected or, kind of something like that. So it's kind of hidden within their play. And so that's the play therapist's job, is to see the world through the child's eyes and then kind of help them move through that at the child's pace. And so I think that's important for parents to understand, that that's kind of how play therapy works. It's not all like, we're going to come in, you're going to sit on my couch, we're going to talk about this. That's not
right.
how their brains work.
What ages do you find the play therapy seems to be the most effective?
Yeah, ooh, that is an excellent question. Um, in my opinion, and it depends on what type of play therapist you're asking.
Okay.
There's child-centered play therapy, there's
Hmm.
cognitive behavior play therapy, all of that. I align more closely with that cognitive behavior play therapy,
Okay.
and in my opinion, to answer that question, when we have kids from 3 to about 6 or 7, depending on
Hmm.
the developmental age, not the
Hmm.
chronological age. That's a
Hmm.
really good non directive play therapy chunk of
Okay.
time. When we start getting older, when we start getting into like first grade, second grade, third grade, we are getting a little bit more cognitive. So we can use more activity based play, or sand tray is a really good way to kind of get all that emotion out as well.
A sand tray? Could you
A,
tell us what that is?
yeah, so sand tray is literally a tray, like a box.
Okay.
Um, and traditionally, puristly, it has a blue bottom and it's a certain size. I can't remember the dimensions right now, and it's full of
Sure.
sand. And then a sand tray therapist will have as many figures as we can get our hands on,
Okay. Okay.
that are like, about that big, like 2-3 inches tall, and their representation of different things. So we have magical figures, we have houses that are scary or charming, or castles, we have dragons, we have trees and fences, and, other kind of, um, foresty things. We have animals, all sorts of different types of animals. We have real, we have make believe. And the idea is that a child or person, adult doing sand tray, will pick out, the characters to represent their worlds.
Okay.
And so we give different prompts, right? The prompt might be pick out 10 to 15 figures to represent your world. That's a very like go-to generic prompt.
Okay.
For divorce, it may be like, can you make a picture in the sand tray with the figures about how you're feeling about this? And then
Yeah.
they get to just kind of create this sculpture-esque type, you know, scene. And then we get to talk about it, and we get to say, oh, that monster in the corner, you tell me about that monster. What's going
Yeah.
on there? Right. So, or whatever they put in there. So it can be a very projective and cool way to really see the child's world.
That's so interesting. And so really when the children are doing that, they're telling their story and they're getting something. It's like, you know, I tell people to grieve, you have to tell the story over and
Mhm.
over. So
Mhm.
the children are telling the story
Mhm.
through either any of those means of play
Mhm.
therapy, and they're getting it out.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
right. Mhm. And
You meant, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to add, and because kids developmentally have not gained the emotional vocabulary or developmental skill to put the words with what they're feeling, that's what us play therapists are doing. We're saying, oh, so you're feeling X, Y, and Z, and we're helping them make that connection.
And then you get feedback through the play, through verbal. And of course, I'm sure, the kids, when you really kind of what we call hit the nail on the head, sometimes you can really see it in their body language, like,
oh yeah,
oh yeah.
Yeah, or the opposite, denial, right? They'll be, oh no, that's not it, and they'll just take everything out.
Oh no,
Absolutely
I'm
not.
not mad. Let's start over.
Yeah, like, ooh, did I get it right there?
I know that it's really common around that age, and you would know better than me, but around that age, kids can feel a lot of responsibility. Like, oh, I didn't obey enough, and that's why they're getting a divorce. Dad's mad at me, mom's mad at me, or my sister blames me because I'm such a crybaby. How do you deal with guilt that they bring in and express? That's such a big topic, I would think.
Yeah, I think, the first step is giving them that space to express it.
Okay.
And I think an earlier question you had said, like, when do they start expressing these things? Well, we have to remember that this is a relationship, right? So they're not just going to
Right.
come in and talk about it in the first session. They have to
Sure.
trust us first, just like an adult has to trust their
Just like an
therapist.
adult. Right.
Right. So once we do get into that working phase of therapy where we've built the relationship and we're there, then that's when there's enough safety in the relationship between the therapist and the client where the therapist can start to challenge some of those beliefs. Oh, you're feeling guilty. You feel like this is your fault. How
Yeah.
true is that, do you think?
Yeah.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
then we can kind of
Mm-hmm.
work through that. With little kids, um, there's more parent involvement on that piece, right? It's
Okay. So you're going to get more input.
right. We're gonna work with the parents a little bit more in depth to make sure the parents are not accidentally sending the message that this is the child's fault, right? So we're gonna,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, why is the kid feeling like this? And then let's talk with mom and dad and make sure we've got appropriate verbiage to talk about divorce and change, and we're making sure that we're reinforcing that this is not the child's fault and they have no responsibility, things like that.
That's great. That's great because I mean it's so easy for the child to take responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
even if the parents I know if even if they're not saying negative things, if they're just neutral, that a lot of times is not good enough, right? They have to be proactive in making it clear
Yeah.
because I know in that age range, I've had so many adults that, man, at 7, 8, or 9 years old, they just feel responsible for everything around them. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, they put it in a relationship perspective, right? I know
Hmm.
so many partners when one is probably a verbal expressor and then the other one is internal, right? And so that
Right.
verbal
Right.
expressor is like making up all of this stuff because they're not getting feedback from their internal expressor partner.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and kids are the same way. They're going to make it up if you don't tell them,
I
pretty
always tell
concretely.
people silence leads to confusion. If you
Yes.
don't tell them. Yes.
Yep. It's the same for kids and parents, right? If you don't tell them, if you don't have these hard conversations in a safe space where they can ask the questions, they're just going to be confused. And who knows what those little imaginations are going to come up with.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask a question about parents for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you find is kind of the ideal parents, if we could have an ideal for they're bringing their child in and they're the way they're interacting with their parents, obviously, or with their children. Obviously, part of it is being proactive.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is between mom and dad. This is our stuff, etc. You didn't have anything to do with it, or whatever. But what are some things that parents could know, if they are going through this now, or sometime in the future, what are some things that parents could know, if they are going through this now, or sometime in the future, what are some things that parents could know, if they are going through this now, or sometime in the future, what are some things that parents could know, if they are going through this now, or sometime in the future, what are some things that parents could know, if they are going through this now, or sometime in the future, What are some things they can bring? Obviously, getting their children help through this really hard process is a big thing, but what else could parents know?
I think the most vital, important thing parents can do is not put your kid in the middle of the divorce. Like,
Yeah.
and it's hard, right? Because as adults going through that, we have so many emotions, and we may be angry at our partner or soon to be ex-partner, or there's just a lot going on internally for the parent. So it can be really hard to separate that. And it can be really hard to not put your kid in the middle of that and say and talk negatively about your partner in front of the kids. So we really
Yes.
need, even though these parents are going through a divorce and they no longer want to be united, we
Right.
still need a united parenting front. We need really good co-parenting. And if parents could just put aside all of their emotions and parent and put their child first in this situation, I think that can make a huge difference in the difficulty or ease of the transition.
That's so helpful because what you're saying it just fits exactly with what I've worked with adults. The worst cases are when one of two things happen and they're very related.
Mm-hmm.
But, one of them is they're in the middle somehow. They're brought into the middle. Well, your mother this or your dad that, or here he
Mm-hmm.
goes again. Or how about this, of course? When you go over to see your dad, you tell him ABC,
Yep.
you know,
Uh-huh. Don't do that.
ah, and then as the kids get a little older, not necessarily the 7 or 8 year olds, but the 12 or 13-year-olds, they may be really mature, and mom
Mm-hmm.
or dad could lean on them as a confidant or that counselor in the house. And oh no, don't do that either.
Yeah, we call that parentification when a child has to parent their
Hmm.
parents
Hmm.
at a young age. That's called parentification, and to be honest, there are strengths that come out of that
It's true.
resiliency, right? But there's also a price to pay for that as
Yes.
a child growing up in that type of environment.
Yeah. Some of that parentification is, like you said, yes, you grow up fast, but it's too fast.
It's too
And there's
fast. Yeah.
always, it's like anything that grows too fast, too quickly, too much, too fast. And yeah, there's fallout because, you lose a part of your childhood there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think what we see a lot of that resonated with me that you just said was, well, when you get to your dad's house or when you get to your mom's house, you tell them that just is so confusing for a child.
Hmm.
And what's more confusing is when you have one parent saying one value or message and then another parent saying the opposite value or message
Right.
because of anger or just lack of communication between the parents, things like that. So it can those conflicting messages can really cause a lot of behavior disruptions because they're confused.
Yes, it is. It's confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people when we're working on grieving, because I know so much of this is working through the grieving, going through the play therapy. First it's of course that shock and that denial. I can't believe this is happening. And we know those other steps like, oh, I get angry, it's natural. The bargaining, I'm trying to figure it out and make sense. Oh, is it my fault? Is it dad's fault? Is it mom's fault? Is it grandma's fault or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell people, there's a swirl in the middle of that. You'll go back and forth between the anger and figuring it out and then the true depression or the sadness. Um, but what do you see? Where do you see when you see children um, making progress? What are some of the signs of progress that you're looking for? Oh, this is good. This
Mm.
is happening.
Yeah, I think when we have emotional regulation,
Hmm.
um, I should say a developmentally appropriate emotional regulation. I feel like I always
Hmm.
have to put that caveat in because when us therapists say we want our children to be emotionally regulated, parents tends to take that message as 100% of the time. And
Right.
That's not what we mean.
Nobody's ever arrived there, right, Melissa?
No, no, nobody's gotten there.
Nobody's gotten there.
We want them developmentally, emotionally regulated.
Yes.
So we're still going to have tantrums and feelings and things like that. But when we see that, when we see kind of this like even keeled thing, when we start meeting goals in therapy, that's really the measure of success. When parents come and that's what we say. We say, what are your goals? Why are you coming to therapy?
Sure.
What can we help you with? What do you need?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's, when we're working with kids of divorce, we just want them to make sure that they're okay and that they're coping okay with this and things like that. So if those are the goals, when we see kids able to, say things like, I'm really sad, or I felt really confused, but I asked a question and now I'm feeling a little bit better about it. That's a huge, great sign.
That's great.
So things like that. And then I think the other one is when we see kids be able to kind of set their own boundary, right? Like kind of be like, no, I don't want to talk about that right now. Or yes, I'm ready to talk about that. Then that's another like, okay, we're kind of getting in the right spot. We are appropriately handling the emotion. We're feeling it, we're going through it, and then we're also able to have moments of joy as well.
That's so good. That is so good. I love to hear about the steps. And of course, it's great to see, great to see the kiddos, great to see the adults make some progress. Let me ask you this, Melissa. Let's say that the child really has made some progress. You can see that you've met some goals, and maybe we're a couple months in or a few months in, to them working on this. But when they're really honest, they're like, I really am still mad at dad or mom. And it could be very appropriate, right? Somebody may have taken off, somebody may be drinking every night, or it could be something very dramatic or whatever, right? How do you work with the children when you get down to, true anger? And there's some legitimate reasons to be angry, of course.
Yeah. Anger is so interesting. I think that I would argue for people in general, anger is almost always the symptom of of the emotion that's actually happening, and not really the anger, right? So what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times with kids, I will do the anger iceberg activity. Where so if you think of an iceberg, and I always refer to the Titanic, but like none of my kids know what that is anymore.
No, they don't know.
So I've stopped doing that.
Right.
But so if you think of an iceberg in the water, I tell people we only see the top 10% of the iceberg. And I sometimes I'll bring in a cup of water and I'll put one ice cube in that water. And I'll say, how much of the ice cube, if this were like dyed black, how much of the ice cube can you see? And it's just a little teeny tiny bit.
It's a tiny bit at the top.
Yeah. And the rest of the ice cube is completely submerged. So we can't see that. And that's kind of how anger is. Anger is just the teeny tiny little tip. But underneath the water, there's, think of your 3-year-old who's hungry. They're showing anger, right? If they're tired, they're showing anger. If they're overstimulated, they're showing anger. If they're, overwhelmed with all the things going on, they're showing anger. So I think for us, when we work with kids, we are really trying to say, okay, yes, you are angry and you're validated in that anger. And what is also beneath the surface? Why are you angry? Are you feeling abandoned? Are you feeling hurt? Are you feeling confused? Is it, hitting a value that is not being touched appropriately? Like what's really causing this anger? And let's, live in that for a moment.
That's so good. And so I love the iceberg analogy. I really like that because I'm sure some of the kids, they're just afraid they're not going to be taken care of the way they were. I'm not going to have the same house or the same neighborhood. Is it going to be okay? But,
the unknown.
there's just so many unknowns, right? And so there's a lot of things that can be connected with that anger. So we have to go after we have to find out what the rest of the iceberg looks like.
Yeah, for sure.
I really like that.
Thank you.
And let me ask, I know it's obviously we got a big difference between that 4-year-old and that 11-year-old. What
Mm-hmm.
are some things with those 11, 12-year-olds that are really going to be unique, as far as some of those issues compared to the real young ones?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about like threes, fours, fives, we're really in the metaphor of
Okay.
therapy, right? So we're kind of staying within the metaphor, within the play. When we're
Mm-hmm,
getting
mm-hmm,
into those preteens, 11s, 12s, 13s, and then,
mm-hmm.
into
Yeah,
teenagers, we're getting out of the metaphor and we're saying things like, I am actually really angry at my parent.
yeah,
And they're able to more cognitively express that.
yes,
Um, and so therapy changes a little bit in moments like that. We're going to be doing more of an activity therapy. So 11 is interesting because if we have like 11 and 12, those preteen years are interesting because developmentally it is so broad of what they're capable of.
yeah, yeah,
So we'll have an 11-year-old who's really maybe emotionally more like an 8 or 9-year-old, but then we'll
yes.
also have 11-year-olds that are really emotionally more like a 13 or 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, seeing the child from their perspective and from their world. And then clinically, we can make a decision where we go with that. Do we do some play based activity? So maybe we're bringing in a specific guided activity to help them process the anger or
Mm-hmm.
the unknown or the change going on. Or are we going to be a little bit more talky? That's what I call it with my teens. Like, do you like to
Okay.
talk? Are you a talky
Okay.
person? or,
That's
or are
good.
you right? And so so it really depends on the kiddo, but sometimes it is just, kind of what you think of more of your traditional talk therapy with those
Okay.
preteens and teens. And other times we need a little bit more of a tool to have a safe boundary to talk about the hard stuff in. And that comes in the form of an activity.
Okay, that's good. And Melissa, would you say that most of the work is done there in that therapy session, or are the kids doing things at home? Are you sending them home with anything, or hey, I want you to do this at home, or mom or dad help you with this, or
Yeah, it depends on the kiddo and the
hmm
situation. If
okay,
I can have parents, if follow through with a at home activity or homework assignment, if you
right,
will,
right, yeah,
then we'll do that. And we have some families that are like really good about doing that. Other families are just too busy, and so we'll kind of stick. We want to make therapy tailored to what they're capable of. So if
sure,
we just need to live in this space in our therapeutic room, then okay, let's keep it in here for a while. If you are ready to take it out into the world and process it in real time, great. Here's some homework assignments that you can do. Um, I think the other level of it is sometimes we're not working with the kid on the homework assignments, but we're working with the parents on the homework assignments. So it could sound something like, hey, mom, I need you to be more emotionally available for your kiddos. So at nighttime, if she starts talking to you,
hmm
then we know we're going to forego the 15-minute bedtime routine and we're just going to
yes,
talk, talk, talk and connect, connect, connect. Or it could be, hey, both parents, I need you guys to communicate a little bit more effectively together. So what we're going to work on is you guys talking about strategies for parenting, and here's a strategy I want you to practice this week. So it can look a lot of different
that's
ways.
great. That's great. And I'm sure there's a little variability, like you said, on parents doing their homework too, because I know with the adults I work with, there's a little variability when I give
Yes.
them homework. But
I
those are great exercises.
Yeah, I will say too, I think in my experience, at least with the parents we work with, they are more eager and committed to completing a homework assignment in the name of helping their child than they are
Yes.
for themselves.
Yes, I get that. I get that. And obviously they're motivated to seek you out and to find you and to bring their child up there. So
hmm
that puts them kind of a little above the crowd just to start with.
Yeah,
We're trying to help our child, and we're recognizing, hey, we need some help.
And that is the first and the most hard step to take.
Yes, it's exactly right. Just making the call, making the appointment, and showing up that first time, right? Who was it that said 90% of life is just showing up? This is another case, right?
I love that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I've told my kids, hey, a lot of life is just showing up when you're supposed to show up, right? That
That's the
takes
hardest
courage.
part.
Yes, it takes courage.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so helpful, Melissa. Can you think of any kind of closing thoughts or extra points that you might want to make sure you get in talking about this great overview of working with children through a divorce and through the grieving process?
Yeah, I think I would say if any parents listening, I hope this has been helpful. And if you take away anything, I think I would want you to take away 2 points. One, asking for help in these situations, it is vulnerable and it is hard, but it's worth it because all of us therapists, we're not here to judge. Like we love helping people through the hard stuff. This is what we do. So we are going to come at you with compassion. And I think the other piece that I would want parents to take away is how important it is to be able to put aside your emotions in front of your children for the sake of your child. Because children, developmentally, the part of the brain in that prefrontal cortex that regulates emotions, it is not fully developed literally till 25.
Right.
So what does that mean for parents? That means that when your kid is 12 years old, like 50% of the time, they need you to co-regulate with them, which means they need you to be calm and, regulated. So I think that would be like my big takeaway is the more calm and regulated that you can be and lend that to your children and be that united front, the easier this transition is going to be.
That is so good. But
That's
tell
right.
us how we can get in touch.
Yeah, I think so. We've got wellnestcounseling.com. And then across all the socials, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, we are at WellNest Counseling.
Okay.
And then a really great way to get a hold of us is just to email us. And our email is info at wellnestcounseling.com. So we try to make it really simple.
That is simple. I love it. You've done so well. We were so excited to have you on today, and we wish you the best over at your practice. So glad that you're helping our children in Dallas because we need all the help we can get.
Well, I really appreciate you all having me on. This has been so fun.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share with others who might need it. And you can find additional resources at SamaritansWell.com.